was going to ask you about that.
Now I can share again. Okay. Our schedule says tonight we're supposed to talk about estimated taxes, voluntary withholding, and current issues. We've already talked some on current issues, but I'll give you a little update and we'll talk a little bit more about it. If you have not elected out of Social Security, then you probably need to pay some estimated taxes. Fairly easy to do. You can set something up with the IRS and go onto their website and ask them to, set up an account there, and you can pay it via bank draft directly from your bank account to the IRS. You also probably need to think about estimated taxes for the state. Although state won't be a whole lot, you may be able to just increase some withholding and let your wife increase withholding or whatever, but you may need to do estimated taxes for both state and federal. Estimates at the state and federal level are due April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, and January 15th of the following year. So, for example, someone paying estimates for this year would have paid something in April last year, in June last year, in September last year, and in January of this year. Not hard to do, not just make sure you keep up with when you do make payments and how much you make and et cetera, so you can claim those appropriately on your tax return as you file your tax return. You can ask the church if they would withhold from your pay. Now, we currently have one preacher for which we do that. We have 4 that we pay regularly, but only one has that we do voluntary withholding. And we have done that. We have to pay some the IRS anyway for the secretary we got, so I may as well increase the amount I pay and pay for withholding for a preacher as well. So you can ask the church. Now, they don't have to say yes. They can always say no. If they don't have a secretary, they would have no necessarily reason to be paying the IRS on a regular basis. So they may say no because they don't want to have to put up with the hassle of doing that. In which case, the only way you would have a way to pay the IRS would be estimated taxes. But if you want to, and if they agree to, they can withhold something and then pay it forth to the IRS on a monthly or semi-weekly, every Wednesday or Friday, depending on how much their liability is. Or it could be, if its liability is less than $2,500 for the quarter, they could pay it with their 941 and pay it on a quarterly basis. But like I say, they don't have to do it. They don't have to agree to do it. But if you ask and they do agree to it, that's fine. They can do so. And let's talk about some current issues. We talked about the Freedom from Religion Foundation earlier. And back in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, they were having a disagreement, an argument, whatever you want to call it, with the IRS about housing allowance. And they sued the IRS. The IRS said they didn't have standing to sue because they were not paying any housing allowance. So they went back and paid their couple of their executives a housing allowance and sued again. And I think that was in 2017 that they sued again. And the IRS basically said, no, they weren't allowed to do housing allowance because they weren't a church and weren't paying people who were doing work as a minister. So the courts took their suit and actually held, I think it was in 19 or 20, that they rendered a judgment that said there was a reason that churches had, that Congress had set up housing allowance as a tax-free thing for ministers. There was a valid reason other than a religious reason. The church found that it did exist. So they did not get their suit heard. Well, they got it heard, but they did not win on their suit. They also filed suit about filing Form 1023, which is a form that most 501c3 organizations, except for churches, had to file. And Form 990. Form 1023 is the application to get recognition as a charitable organization, but churches do not have to file it. The IRS stance is that churches automatically are deemed to be a charitable organization, and therefore they don't have to file a 1023. They also claim that the churches should be filing 990s. A 990 is a form that charitable organizations, nonprofit organizations, have to file with the IRS on an annual basis. And depending on how much the charity collects, less than 50,000, they can do it through what the IRS calls a 990 postcard, which is basically you go in online and fill out a little bit of information and certify that you collect less than the $50,000 for the prior year. And the churches don't have to do that either. Most charitable organizations, except for churches, do have to do it. Most nonprofit organizations, except for churches, do have to do it. So they sued the IRS over filing of both of those forms. Those forms have been, the lawsuit has been not accepted, well, not is finalized, and they did not win the lawsuit. And then I told you about some local actions, barbecue restaurant that was given people who would bring in their church bulletin. They were giving a discount on Sunday, and they sued over that. So that's just the nature of their suits. I want to show you. Here it is. Let me stop share on what we're sharing right now and share. Okay. They have recently, this month sometime, asked us, asked that they look at a Wisconsin church and basically take away their tax exempt status because they are politicking. Now, as we said earlier, when you politic, you're not allowed to politic as a charitable organization, 501c3 organization. They found a Catholic church in Cottage Grove, Wisconsin, had been used their church bulletin to advise their parishioners to vote for an unnamed her, to not vote for an unnamed her in a Wisconsin Supreme Court race on Tuesday, April 4th. But the election was between a woman and a man, so they were obviously referencing the woman who was running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And in their bulletin, they would say that on one side of this race, one candidate has tried to make this race entirely an effort to legalize abortion in the state of Wisconsin. Abortion is the intentional taking of human life. It is murder. Our Catholic faith is clear that this is grave sin. And as a Catholic, I urge you, for the salvation of your soul, do not vote for her in the Supreme Court race on April 4th. They never named the candidate. They name simply her as the way to identify the candidate. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation saw their bulletin and filed a court case asking that they investigate this Roman Catholic Church for obviously participating in politics and participating in intervening in publishing or distributing statement regarding politics and any candidates for public office. So they wrote that in this instance, this St. Patrick's Catholic Church has breached the responsibilities of its tax-exempt status by openly opposing a candidate for elected office. So they're still at it. They're still trying to do. Now, I don't agree with what the Catholic Church in Cottage Grove, Wisconsin did. I think they would have been better off to advise their parishioners that one of the candidates was seeking to legalize abortion and was for abortion, and that the other candidate was not. And as Catholics, they did not believe holding up for abortion or standing up for abortion was correct, and that they would advise their parishioners to not vote for, or to vote their conscience in the election, as opposed to asking them not to vote for her in that Supreme Court race. There are ways you can do that that would not be necessarily a violation of the edict against engaging in political campaigns. And I think they probably have overstepped the line a little bit in what they did. So, as you can see, it is very much, okay, I don't know what screen I'm sharing because it shows I'm staring. The sharing is on my PowerPoint slides. Which are you seeing?
Right now, I'm still seeing the one about the Catholic Church. It doesn't say whether it's PowerPoint or not.
It's not on PowerPoint.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go back to share this PowerPoint slide. There's share. There. Okay. We talked about housing allowance only being allowed for one house. We talked about the Religious Liberty and Charitable Deductions Act of 1997. Religious liberty, the charitable deduction side is where IRS, they were asking everyone to send letters for every donation in excess of $250 via check, that you have to have a recognition from the charity before you file your tax return. And you have to have that recognition in hand before you file the tax return. We've talked about a couple of court cases where the courts have said you didn't have it in hand when you filed your tax return, therefore we don't allow the deduction. That's what really is behind the Religious Liberty and Charitable Deductions Act of 97. We talked about state and local sales tax and property tax. Here in Georgia, churches are generally subject to any state and local sales tax. Property tax that is used for religious purposes, they are exempt from property tax. But if the property tax is used for non-religious purposes, they are not exempt from. Now, on sales tax, we said that the only thing that the sales tax in Georgia gives us an exemption for if you buy bells to go in your steeple. I don't know why that's an exemption, but that's what the State Department of Revenue says an exemption. For property tax, any property that you own that is used for religious purposes is not subject to property tax. But if you own, say the church owned some rental houses and they rented those houses to anyone, that would not be exempt property tax wise. They would have to pay property tax on that. We talked about organizing a church. For years, Piedmont Road, where I go, was not organized, was just a trusteeship. The courts have held that trusteeships, every member is severally and jointly liable. So we took the action of organizing as a Georgia nonprofit organization. Georgia allows nonprofits to be either membership organizations or non-membership organizations. We have, based on lawyers' advice, organized ourselves as non-membership. The directors of the organization is the eldership. And that's the way that our organization legal documents specify it, as the eldership. Does not name names. We do. In fact, I was just checking today because all organizations in Georgia have to file with the Secretary of State by April 1st every year. $30 if it's a nonprofit organization, or $50 if it's a for-profit organization. And I was just checking to make sure that all our organizations were legitimate and had paid for this year and filed for this year, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're with a church that does not have elderships, I don't know that you could be anything other than a trusteeship. Now, you could be legally organized as a nonprofit organization and have a member or some members listed in the organization, the documents, and have them be those people who have to have the business meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So that would keep everybody, every member, from having to be jointly and severally liable. But without an eldership, I don't know that if you legally organized, how you would name who would be the responsible parties unless you just name specific individuals. That's something that you would have to talk to a lawyer about, but I would advise that any organization, any church, become legally organized if they possibly can. Now, that comes with a few expenses. Like I said, you had to pay $50 every year to the Secretary of State for them to recognize your articles of incorporation as being legitimate. If you don't pay them 1 year, then they are liable to void your articles of incorporation. and they can do that. So it also, we have to, at Piedmont Road, we have to have an annual meeting. Does not take a lot, but we have to do such because of the law in Georgia that has to have an annual meeting. And so we do every year, generally in December. We talk about the things that, some of the things that have gone on in the prior year. And we have minutes of our meeting. We have our budget for the next year. We have actuals for year to date that are correct, and we certify those as correct in our annual meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it takes us less than an hour to do the annual meeting every year. It costs us $30 to keep our articles valid and with the Secretary of State. So, but we have to do that every year. But it's well worth it to not have every member of the Piedmont Road jointly and severally liable. And then we talked about open carry laws. Now, with Georgia's recent enactment of open carry, or what they call constitutional carry, when they first looked at it, they said that every church in Georgia had the right to say whether their membership could or could not carry openly or concealed. If they said no carry, open carry or concealed carry, then carrying a firearm into their place of meeting would have violated what they set down, and you would be in violation of the law. If they said, yes, we'll let anyone that wants to either have open carry or concealed carry, then carrying a gun, either concealed or open, would not put you in violation of the law. And my understanding, unless the law has changed recently with the open carry, or what they call constitutional carry, I don't know that anything has changed there. But the church had the right, and I understand still has the right, to specify whether they're going to allow carry at their place or not. And then we talked what we had just talked on the Catholic Church in Wisconsin. They're prohibited from engaging in substantial efforts to influence legislation. No definition of substantial, but in Season Good versus Commissioner, and I give you a cite on the court case, federal 2nd District court case, 5%, less than 5% was deemed to not be substantial. In Haswell versus US, once again, a 2nd District court case, 16 to 20% was deemed to be substantial. So somewhere between 5 and 16% is gray area. Less than 5 is not substantial. Over 16 or 16 to 20 is substantial. So if you engage in efforts to influence legislation, you don't need to engage in substantial efforts. Now, how we rate that, I don't know. How, I don't know what they're looking at. If you had one article in a bulletin and you published one bulletin every week, 1 out of 52, so you're doing less than 2%. So one article is engaging in an effort to influence legislation, and less than 2% would not be substantial. If you had an article half the time, it would be substantial. If you had an article every month, it would be substantial. So, if you're going to do something and to attempt to influence legislation, make sure that it's not substantial. It's less than 5% of the actions you do. And no 501c3 organization can participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distribution of statements, any political campaign on behalf of any candidate for public office. This is what the IRS talked about on the Freedom from Religion Foundation, what they were suing about. This Catholic Church, they were saying, was participating in or intervening in, including the publishing and distribution of a statement of a political campaign on behalf of any candidate, or in this case, opposed to any candidate for public office. Now, the IRS acknowledges that. Say you're a preacher and you don't publish it in the bulletin for the church, but you make an expression speaking as yourself, not as a minister. The IRS says that that is okay. That you can't, they're not attempting to restrict your free expression on political matters by leaders speaking for themselves as individuals. Now, when you put it in a church bulletin like the Catholic Church did in Wisconsin, I think you crossed the ground, crossed the line there. I think that's prohibited. But church leaders are prohibited from making partisan comments in official publications or at official functions. So a preacher that gets up on Sunday morning and tells his congregation how they should vote, who they should vote for, I think has crossed the line. A preacher that gets up and talks about the issues that they may face in an upcoming election, such as one candidate is for abortion, one candidate is not. We do not believe that the Bible teaches abortion is an appropriate thing to do. Therefore, we would encourage you to look at the candidates, research the candidates, and see if they are for abortion or against abortion. I think that is a legitimate statement. You're not endorsing a specific individual. You're not condemning a specific individual. You are saying that one of the issues that the candidates may differ on, we have thoughts about that issue and whether that issue is correct in them endorsing it or not. And the same could be true of any of a number of things. But as long as you don't endorse a candidate or fail to endorse, a candidate, argue against voting for a candidate, then I think that is currently just okay. The IRS has a requirement to update the responsible party on Form 8822B. Now, if you wanted to change your address, other than sending in a new address on a tax return, that asks to change your address. Another way to change your address with the IRS is fill Form 8822B. Also, 8822B is used to update responsible parties. So if you have a filing for a non-church, non-profit organization, or if you are paying the IRS taxes to the IRS, that you've got a secretary and then you can change that responsible party by going to Form 8822B and filing it with the IRS. If you fail to do that, and you fail to change address, and the IRS tries to send you something and finds that it's non-deliverable, then they could fine you. So that's, I think, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Any questions?
No, sir, we don't have any.
Okay. Let me stop share right here. Next week, we will talk about the biblical authority for a minister being paid. That should be, that's the only class where we're going to open the Bible and look at it. We've opened up law books and textbooks and IRS publications and everything, but next week we'll be coming from the Bible. 2 weeks from tonight is our final exam. We will spend the first part of class going over the second half, what we've covered since the midterm, and we will cover the final exam. Then the last half class, I'll send it to you like I did the midterm, and you'll have some time to give your answers, and we'll grade it and give you a test, give you the exam. So anything anything you want to ask, be ready next week or the following week to ask, and then we'll have the final exam on the 13th. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Roger.
All right, sir. We'll
right.
have the recording put out later tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.